Welcome to Impact Discipleship, Ancient Words of Wisdom. This week, Proverbs 13.
Yes, we are continuing. Thank you. We are continuing in our Ancient Words of Wisdom series that actually is going to take us through 20 chapters of the book of Proverbs. This is chapter 13, all the way through chapter 29 will be in this series. So this is volume 4. It's the fourth proverb in this list, and I'm keeping a running total. That means it's wise words 92 to 116. I don't know how many we're going to get to when we're done, but it's 20 straight chapters, right? This one actually only 25 verses, and to remind our listeners and you guys that are present, what I do is I kind of extract one or two words that kind of give me the greatest impression of what the proverb is about. Sometimes it's a word inside the proverb, sometimes it's a word that comes to me because of the proverb, and sometimes I need more than one word, but most of the time it's one word. So as we've been doing, we'll read the proverb. This is going to be Proverbs 13. I won't keep repeating that. Proverbs 13, starting in verse 1 all the way to verse 25. I'll read the proverb. I'll give you the key word that kind of came to my attention. And maybe when I'm reading it, you should be thinking, what is that? What's the main takeaway? As you probably remember if you've been following along, sometimes, most of the time, these individual sentences are contrasting one another. There's a piece, there's one statement and then something that contrasts, like wisdom and foolishness, or righteousness and evil, or wickedness, right? There's a contrast. Every once in a while, it's more like a continuous statement. It's like flowing, where the second part is accentuated the first part, right? So you'll notice the difference in that. And I'm not 100% sure why I gather out of some of these things what I'm getting, because sometimes they kind of seem to go a little off the path. But it's just a process, and they take a long time to do. This is actually more difficult to write than I expected, because each one feels like a labor. I have to stop in each verse and really labor, and what does it mean, and what's the big takeaway? All right, let's start. Proverbs 13:1. A wise son listens to his father's instruction, but a scoffer doesn't listen to rebuke. And the key word that I got out of here is belligerent. It is common as a child grows and begins to make decisions about the world around them that they start to question the instructions of their own parents. It is not a point of disrespect. Every parent should hope their children learn to exercise their thinking apparatus. However, that is not the same as a child becoming arrogant, concluding that they know it all, or minimally that they know more than their parents. This is often revealed during a time of correction when differing opinions emerge. A know-it-all child risks developing a habit of ridiculing their parents' advice, oftentimes becoming belligerent to their own detriment. You catch the difference between the two? It's okay to think, it's okay to ask questions. I remember when our children were very young, we would say at some points in time, you can question, but first obey, right? It's okay to say, hey, why this or why that, but when you're young, you have to develop the habit of obedience first, and then start questioning. But as you get older and you start becoming independent, and your brain is operating better, and you have more discernment, it is okay. You want your children to start questioning what they're hearing, but not in a rude way, and not in a know-it-all way. Verse 2. By the fruit of his lips a man enjoys good things, but the soul of the unfaithful crave violence. I called this one soul food. A man's words have within them the power of life and death, richness and poverty. Words come in two flavors, those that he looses from his mouth and those that he speaks to himself internally, or those that speak to him internally. A man who believes he need not be accountable to the living God is free to speak anything he wishes, and usually uses his words to harm others. Ironically, he also freely wounds himself by feeding on self-talk that is an assault to his very own soul. You see, I got some acknowledgement in the room here, right? You get that, right? So you see those two things, right? The words we speak are not only the words that come out of our mouth, but it's that self-talk that goes on. And if you're in the habit of speaking death to others, you're also going to be in the habit of speaking death to yourself. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak. Verse 3, along the same line, he who guards his mouth guards or preserves his soul. One who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. You kind of get that, what you're feeling here. It's like, loose lips, kind of loose lips, sink ships. The word I got from this is the word restraint. If you go back one verse and take a moment to contemplate the power of words, what we just read, it makes perfect sense why a man must exercise utter restraint, to guard his words as if they are precious jewels. A man's soul, his mind, will, emotions, intentions, motivations, inspirations, and aspirations are all shaped with his words. A man who cares for his words like they are his most valuable asset will prosper. A man who treats his words like a cheap bag of chips that he purchased in a 24-hour convenience store will find they serve as a detrimental, self-fulfilling prophecy. You get the contrast, like a valuable jewel versus a bag of cheap chips? Like that's the contrast between somebody who guards his words and treats them like treasures versus being loose and sloppy and speaking death. Staying in line with this understanding of the soul, verse 4, the soul of a sluggard desires and has nothing, but the desire of the diligent shall be fully satisfied. And this, I just extracted this word, diligence. What is it about diligence? Back to this understanding as we repeat what the soul is. To cultivate a healthy soul, right? Mind, will, emotions, intentions, motivations, inspirations, aspirations. To cultivate a healthy soul takes effort. A man who is not willing to do the work, to meditate on his desires and affirm they are from the Lord, and to then step out and actually act on where the Lord leads him, is a man who waves a banner over his own head that reads, wishful thinking. Now, you get that if you get inspired by the Lord to do something. Well, first of all, you shouldn't do something if it's not in line with the Lord. But secondly, if you get inspired by the Lord to do something, you actually have to do it. You can't just go, let me talk about it. But a man who is willing to do the mental and physical work will be fulfilled by what he produces and by the satisfaction he feels for putting in the effort. Right? Even the effort it takes, to pursue what God is telling you to do brings satisfaction. Even not the achievement, even not the arrival, just the pursuit, just the action of obedience brings joy, brings fulfillment. Verse 5. A righteous man hates lies, but a wicked man brings shame and disgrace. For me, and this is going to sound like a little off track, but what I got out of this is intentional. A man who knows that what he says and does is constantly being evaluated by God is very careful about how he lives. I mean, he's intentional in how he lives. He measures carefully what he says, how he acts, and is concerned about what impression he makes on others. If a man has no reverence for God, he could not care less what others conclude about him, and thus he makes no effort to keep himself in check. See, that's what I mean by intentional, right? A man, if you go back and you start thinking, a righteous man hates lies. He's not interested in living a life of pretense. He's not interested in trying to like juke and jive, right? It's disgusting to him. A wicked man ultimately winds up in shame because he doesn't care what he represents. He doesn't care what's going on. He just lives to fulfill his own pleasures. And what does it matter how people see him? He's just not concerned. Verse 6. Righteousness guards the way of integrity, but wickedness overthrows the sinner. I got the word out of this, assurance. You know what assurance means? Assurance is like you could be certain of something, right? Look at that. Doesn't that make you feel comfortable if you read, righteousness guards the way of integrity? It's like a certainty you could have for living a certain way. A man of God will seek the Lord's approval in every arena of life, and thus his testimony is consistent. His lifestyle is an exact reflection of what he claims to believe. A man of integrity is never worried that he may have fooled someone and thus lives with peace of mind. Isn't that a nice feeling when you know that you're living in integrity with people around you, you have this peace of mind, you don't have this constant level of disturbance? It is not the same for an unrighteous man. He is vulnerable to being exposed for his inauthenticity. He lives in a constant risk of hearing the peace of mind of someone he crossed. You like that thing? Peace of mind. Can you see that in your mind? You can't see it unless you're looking at the notes. Peace of mind, P-E-A-C-E, and peace of mind, P-I-E-C-E. You like that? One man lives with peace of mind, and the other man is going to get someone's peace of mind. Number 7. There are some who pretend to be rich, yet have nothing. There are some who pretend to be poor, yet have great wealth. Okay, what's the point here? The point here, I think, is a matter of self-assessment. I don't think it's about rich or poor. I think it's about insecurity. Right? And so think of it this way. But why is anybody pretending anything? Self-conscious, people-pleasing approval seekers are more concerned about what others think than the truth. A man who is secure in his identity need not hyper-focus on impressing others. Can you see that? In pretending. Like a man who has everything, he can let people think he's poor because it doesn't matter. He is who he is. He's secure in who he is. A man who has to pretend he's something he's not is clearly insecure. Number 8. Almost a third of the way through already. The ransom of a man's life is his riches, but the poor hear no threats or rebuke. Pardon me. This was a tough one because I think it's actually saying the opposite of what it appears to be saying. It looks like it's glorifying the rich. It looks like the rich man is the safe man, and the poor man, is resistant to hearing rebuke. Right? It almost says that. It almost seems to say a ransom. The ransom of a man's life is his riches. Like it's going to protect him, but the poor man won't listen to rebuke. But I don't think it's actually saying that. I think it's talking about, the key word I put here is distractions. A wealthy man, think of it now. Now, if you go to that verse again and you hear this, you're going to go, oh yeah, I could see it saying that. A wealthy man has much to lose and many concerns. He is at constant risk of making choices that prioritize the preservation of his status among men rather than caring more about his good reputation with God. I mean, a rich man has a lot of stuff to manage in order to keep maintaining what he has. And therefore, he's at risk of compromise just to keep it. Can you see that? A man with few possessions does not feel the constant pressure to protect his stuff, and thus he has fewer temptations to make choices that will not be looked upon favorably by God. Now, this is not glorifying poorness, right? It's just saying you have to be very careful that your possessions don't become so overwhelming that you'll do anything to keep them, or say anything, or become anything, which of course we see happening all the time in the world, right? People, say that, you see it all the time with artists. Oh, they get famous because they sing beautiful Christian music and this and that, and 2 years later they're dressing like tramps. They're exposing their body, they're singing trashy music, and it's like you got famous singing about God, and then you cash that in for fame to become something just so you can keep maintaining your success, your fame. Anyway, you see it all the time. Number 9, the light of the righteous shines brightly, but the lamp of the wicked is snuffed out. The word that came to mind here for me was illumination. You can either be a source of light or a source of darkness. And for clarity, darkness is simply the absence of light. One lights the path for others to make God-honoring decisions. The other throws blackout curtains over the truth in hopes of steering others off a cliff. This really is about how you influence others with what you represent, right? You're either a light to someone's path or you're covering up the light and causing people to stumble. Number 10. Pride only breeds quarrels, but wisdom is with people who take advice. Pride only breeds quarrels. What's the picture that comes to mind? Can you picture somebody that's constantly causing conflict? The word that came to my mind here is contrarian. You know what a contrarian is? There is a man who will always contend for the opposite of what's being said. I mean, it doesn't matter. If you say right, they say left. You say up, they say down. They literally are more into the quarrel than whether something is true, right? He has no concern for truth or facts. His food is contention, and his soul feeds on conflict. Another man is open-minded. Truth matters more to this man than the need to be right. You see the difference? Pride breeds quarrels because somebody doesn't want to be corrected. They don't want to be wrong. Verse 11. Wealth gained dishonestly dwindles away, but he who gathers by hand makes it grow. Wealth gained dishonestly versus he who gathers by hand. You see the contrast? The word, this was a good one. This one I really like. Some of these I just sit with for minutes and minutes and minutes, like before it comes to me. What came to my mind here is the idea of sustainability. Some men will do whatever it takes to get rich because the material wealth itself is the ultimate destination. When he arrives at his journey's end, he will sadly discover that the stuff that he chased is being sucked into a sinkhole into which he cannot follow. He will find himself stranded at the wrong location with empty pockets. A man who works hard and keeps his priorities in order will become wealthy in due time. He will not chase material wealth into dangerous neighborhoods. Instead, his riches are spread over all areas of his life: spiritual, relational, material, physical, and emotional. His wealth is safe, healthy, and sustainable. That's one that those that are stuck on getting wealthy for the wrong reason should really commit to memory. Verse 12. This is a famous one, by the way. This is like one of the most famous wise sayings. You'll come across them once in a while. Go, oh, I know that one. I've heard that one. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when longing is fulfilled, it is a tree of life. You guys are familiar with that one? That's a famous one. No? Hope deferred makes the heart sick. You haven't heard that one? Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when longing or desire is fulfilled, it is a tree of life. I just used hope for this. Like, what is hope? There's a lot the Bible says about hope. And the other thing is that, like I'm shying away from cross references, right? Like you could find all sorts of verses on hope. Like what definitely comes in mind is the whole section in Romans chapter 5 when it talks about perseverance yielding hope and character. That whole passage. Hope is experienced on two sides of the same coin. It fuels a man's perseverance while simultaneously yielding disappointment. Wow, that's what I think it means when it's deferred. It makes the heart sick. It fuels a man's perseverance while simultaneously yielding disappointment when he reaches the end of the next bend in the road. Who's experienced this? Only to find another expansive vista with no end in sight. Like you're like, yes, oh no, right? You know that feeling? You have hope, it's pushing you forward, and then, it doesn't happen. And then, this is the beauty, and then there's that life-changing moment when he peeks around the bend and smacks right into for what he's been waiting for so long. And the feeling of satisfaction is exhilarating. Isn't that cool? And so it does have this frustrating part where it's like it's being deferred and it's sickening. It's like, but then you keep persevering, and then finally. But in that process, in that middle, the hope itself brings a sickening feeling because you keep hoping, and then it's delayed. It's part of our life as Christians, for sure. 13, whoever despises instruction will pay for it, but he who respects a command will be rewarded. And that idea of respect command really struck me. And to me, that's reverence. The key word here is reverence. There are many reasons to honor the advice of a man to who deserves deep respect. First, I'm not sure if that's good grammar. I have to rethink that. Sometimes I read these, I say, that doesn't sound right. Maybe it should say, there are many reasons to honor the advice of a man to whom there deserves deep respect. I think to whom is the right. Does that sound better? People, you know grammar. We're going to go with that. First, it demonstrates reverence for one who has earned a place of honor. Plus, a man wise enough to take the advice of an honorable man will benefit immeasurably, while a man who shuns the wise counsel of an experienced elder oftentimes pays a hefty price. It just makes so much sense to reverence the ideas of someone who's gone before you, who's demonstrated a testimony that he can be trusted, like seeking the Lord. It makes a shortcut for you in your decision making, your life, and your success. You might as well find someone who knows what you don't know and who's done it right and who has a good testimony in the Lord and follow their counsel. To me, it makes perfect sense to do that. Number 14, 2/3 of the way there almost. The teaching of the wise is a spring of life to turn from the snare of death. So you can see this is kind of like one of those continuous ideas, right, instead of a contrast. You're going to say, where did you get this word? Fertilizer. That's my word for this. The teaching of the wise is a spring of life to turn from the snare of death. You know, is that phrase, the spring of life, which I had this picture in my head of a plant coming out of like a plant emerging, like a seed sprouting and coming out of the dirt. That's what I had in my head when I read it. So I used the word fertilizer, a man who amalgamates into his life the ancient wisdom of men who have proven to be trustworthy to the Lord will find he has planted his seeds in fertile soil. Amalgamate, you know what that means? When you mix things together, you mix ideas together, you blend things together. If you blend the ideas of people who have gone before you that have wisdom, it's like you planted in fertile soil. A man who shuns such wisdom invites barrenness and decay into his life. We might even say into his fields. Verse 15. Good understanding wins favor, but the way of the unfaithful is hard. I use the word here, appropriation. And it came from this idea that good understanding has to be connected to action that's inspired by what you understand, right? You have to, when you appropriate something, you take it in and use it. You don't just consider it, right? It is one thing to acknowledge wise words on paper. It is altogether different to take those words and put them into practice. That is what it looks like to truly understand them. He who does so has an advantage every time. A man who is exposed to the truth, yet he chooses to follow a different path, will find himself on a twisted, rocky road. Verse 16. Every prudent man acts from knowledge. We just saw that, right? We just got a good understanding is this idea that you take knowledge and apply it. So the next verse says, every prudent man acts from knowledge, but the fool exposes folly. This is one of the easiest ways for you to identify a fool. It's one of the trademarks of a fool. To truly know something means that it has become intimately woven into your life. Actual knowledge informs and then changes behavior. That's the word I used for this, behavior. See, that's the thing. You don't truly know something, like say something that's true, unless it becomes part of you and it alters your behavior. It can't really know it if you don't act upon it, like to your advantage, correctly. Only a fool will disregard valuable information. When a man knows something is true and then ignores the obvious facts, it reveals his foolish nature. That's how you identify the fool. Oh, you knew the truth and you didn't do anything about it? Equal sign, fool. Number 17, a wicked messenger falls into trouble, but a trustworthy envoy gains healing. That's not a word we use a lot in our common English language, envoy, right? We don't use that word a lot. You know what word that means, though? It's the word I used in ambassador. Yeah, that's the word I used. That's the key word. An authentic, I like this definition. An authentic ambassador is a perfect copy of whom he is a spokesman. Isn't that cool? An authentic ambassador is a perfect copy of whom he is a spokesman. That's how we have to be with Christ. His character and the message he carries is a true representation of his master's wishes, beliefs, intentions, and authority. Here's the opposite. Ready? A man who is rather a counterfeit speaks on behalf of himself, represents his own will, and is inspired by selfish ulterior motives. He will eventually be indicted for his fraudulent nature. See, that's two things. Like you either represent someone and are a true ambassador, or you represent yourself. The worst type are ones who are representing themselves while they say they're representing somebody else. Those are the true frauds. Most worst type in the church. I represent Christ, but I'm really doing my own thing. I say I represent Christ, but I'm doing my own thing. Number 18, verse 18. Poverty and shame come to him who refuse discipline, but he who heeds correction shall be honored. You know, we could have done a lot here with that, but to me, that idea of refusing discipline, the word that came to my mind was the word dismissive. A man with a dismissive attitude who refuses to be guided and corrected is a man who will soon come to ruin. A man who is willing to be wrong and is open to good advice and then allows that advice to change his course is a man who will succeed. Can you see the difference? Like a rockhead, like a hard-headed person who just is going to drive forward and do what he wants, regardless of the facts, regardless of the advice he gets, regardless of exposure to something that says he should do otherwise. He just dismisses anything other than what he's already decided. That's terribly foolish behavior. But a man who's willing to be corrected and be wrong and change course, of course, that's a much greater path of success. All right, 19. By the way, only 25 verses in this chapter. It's a short one. Longing fulfilled is sweet to the soul, but fools detest turning from evil. You know what I find really interesting about the Proverbs themselves is you can't always tell why he's contrasting these two things. Like you have to kind of find like this common thread. Like why is fools detest turning from evil have to do with longing that fulfills the soul? Like why are they contrasting one another? Why is he using that contrast? And that's where these words come from. Like that's where when I'm meditating on this, I'm like, okay, what's the connecting point of these things? And here, the word was patience. Oftentimes, even this can be a Bible study to itself, just this concept for Christians. Oftentimes, even the righteous things a man longs for are not forthcoming in his desired time frame. However, The longer it takes for his dreams to come into fruition, the sweeter they are when they do. That's a good question for us all as Christians. Are you willing to wait? A foolish man is unwilling to wait for his desires to be fulfilled. He is easily persuaded to take a path of least resistance to get what he wants, even if that path is paved with darkness. See, that's the difference between somebody who's patient in the Lord and someone says, I've waited long enough, I'm going to do my own thing. Right? You see that difference? That's why I have this contrast of longing fulfilled, which is like sweet to the soul, versus detesting evil. Or the fool that says turning from evil, right? He doesn't want to turn from evil. He'd rather just go down the path of what he is going to satisfy him instead of waiting. That's where this idea of patience came from. Verse 20. There's so much the Bible can say about this, and there's so much that you've probably noticed in your own life, and you might even have to consider right now. In verse 20 it says, one who walks with wise men grow wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. And that's the word I use, companions. A man, you've heard this before, this is not my line, I'm just borrowing it from what I've heard before. A man is the sum total of the people with whom he spends the greatest amount of time. I mean, I worded it that way, but I've heard that concept before, right? You've heard that? You are who your friends are, your top 5 friends kind of thing. If he fellowships with If he fellowships with selfless men of love, faith, honor, integrity, wisdom, and success, he too will become those things. A man who commiserates with imbeciles, you like that word? I like that word. Imbeciles, and surrounds himself with self-centered, lazy, unproductive, unmotivated, uninspired, and faithless men, he too will become those things. So you got to really solidify. This is why I talk all the time about community. You find a good community, stay in it. Like, you could find a house anywhere. You could find a pretty backyard anywhere. You could find a nice city anywhere. It's hard to find good community. People that are going to drive you in the right direction and hold you to a standard and lift you up in the Lord. Like, that's harder to find. The physical stuff, easy to find. So, companions. Verse 21. Misfortune pursues sinners, but prosperity rewards the righteous. I wrote the key word here, destiny. It is not a coincidence that tragedy chases down workers of iniquity and slays them. It is also not a coincidence that faithful men of excellent character who aim to please God are rich in all arenas of life, spirit, soul, and body. Only a few more verses to do, guys. Verse 22. I told you it takes a lot longer to write these than it does to teach them. Again, this is verse 22. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored for the righteous. So I thought about this, and the word legacy is what came to mind. And of course, we can't always focus on financial legacy, right? There's so much more than that. A man of God does not chase down riches because he desires to live a lavish life of extravagance and self-indulgence. He considers his wealth as a benefit for others, including his own children and grandchildren. A man filled with iniquity sees material wealth as his final destination. Now, I want you to get that, right? Because there's nothing wrong with wealth. There's nothing wrong with a Christian desiring wealth. It's wrong if wealth is your destination. A man filled with iniquity, sin, sees material wealth as his final destination. Ironically, the pleasure of his richness is his final reward, because in eternity he will look back and see it was his only benefit. Plus, even more ironic is that all the wealth will be left behind for someone else to enjoy. That's why material wealth cannot be your destination. It will never fulfill. It will always leave you empty. And then, remember when Jesus said, you have your reward. You have your reward. You have your reward. You got what you were aiming for the stuff on earth. That's your reward. I hope you enjoy it, because nothing more is coming. That's it. That's what this means here, I think. Okay, verse 23. Now this is another one. But this is not one of those. I think you can understand it just by the surface. I think it looks. I think it's opposite. An abundance of food is in poor people's fields. That doesn't make sense, does it? An abundance of food is in poor people's fields, but injustice sweeps it away. Why? How is there an abundance of food in poor people's fields? That sounds like an oxymoron, right? That sounds like, well, no, there's no food in a poor man's field, right? But the proverb says there's an abundance of food in a poor man's field, but injustice sweeps it away. That's the word I used, injustice. And the reason I used it is because I think we have to get spiritual before we get physical here. All the earth is the Lord's, and its provision is for his people. But evil men strain to obfuscate God's provision with red tape and unjust policies. Meaning you try to usurp what God is doing. So if you look at the earth, you say, why is it that men are oppressing other men? What gave you the right to think you could own something and not let them own something? I'm not talking about communism here. I'm talking about the fact that the earth was created by the Lord to provide for people. There's enough food to feed everyone, right? So what are evil men after? They're after control. They're after taking something from themselves to the detriment of someone else. That's what evil men do. In other words, injustice, right? That's the word I use, injustice. Fortunately, now this is when you go by to this poor people's fields, right? Fortunately, the greater promise is that the meek will inherit the earth, and the food they will harvest is eternal. Those who intended to oppress them are the ones who will experience the ultimate famine. See, in the end, you have to have your eyes fixed on heaven. That's where the real value is, right? Not with what you can glean from your field today. That's not where the real value is. Two more verses, verse 24 and 25. This is verse 24. One who spares the rod, you've heard this, right? This one. One who spares the rod hates his son, but one who loves him is careful to discipline him. So I use the word chastening here. And this connects to things that you've heard from here, from Friday nights especially, when we've talked about sin. When they asked Jesus about loving, what's the greatest commandments? You remember what he said? Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. And we know he quoted two specific areas of Scripture, right? Love God comes from Deuteronomy 6, and love your neighbor comes from Leviticus, 19? 19, 18. Anyway, but you remember what it says there? It says, loving your neighbor is such that you don't stand back and watch them sin and say nothing. See, that's what this says. If you spare the rod, you hate your son. Right? To let sin go unrecognized or unpunished is not love. Permissiveness is a sign of passive aggression and reveals your contempt for another person. See the difference? Like your unwillingness to tell somebody they're sinning is not graciousness. Right? It's permissiveness, which is really passive aggression. One who loves his neighbor or his child will lovingly point out his transgression, which allows for correction. See, you can't heal what you can't feel. You can't reverse your decision if you're not aware, or you won't want to reverse your decision if you're not aware that what you're deciding is wrong. Who's going to tell you? Of course, you can be convicted by the Holy Spirit, but I'm saying we're each, remember Cain and Abel? the Lord says, "Where's your brother?" to Cain after he killed him. And he says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And God says, "Yep." Oops. Right? So you're responsible for calling out sin. You're responsible for it. Final verse of the day. The righteous one eats to the satisfying of his soul, but the belly of the wicked go hungry. And I use the word want here. When the only food that will satisfy your mind, will, emotions, intentions, motivations, and inspirations and aspirations is the food that feeds God's desires for you, you will be truly fulfilled. Can't you see that there is no ultimate satisfaction unless what you're being satisfied with is the will of God? Everything else is going to be empty. Everything else is going to be a dead end. Everything else is going to leave you wanting. All the stuff that you think is satisfying you is going to be temporary. But if your desires are fueled by darkness, you will never feel satisfied. No matter how much junk food of self-indulgence you consume. Right? So the difference is, if you can be satisfied in these things, and it uses the word soul, and every time you see soul, right, you got to think the stuff that's in your brain, the stuff that you experience in your emotions, right? It's not so much the physical thing, right? It's like I said, it's the will, it's your will. What is my will? What am I driving towards? What emotions do I have? What are my greatest intentions? What motivates me? What inspires me? What are my greatest aspirations? What do I want to accomplish? If that's not fueled by what God is feeding, then no matter what you accomplish, you will be hungry. You will not feel satisfied. You understand? All right. Next time we meet on Saturday, we'll do Ancient Proverbs, or Ancient Words of Wisdom, Volume 5. That would be Chapter 14. And I hope that helps. Take these words, put them into practice. You know, there's probably some of them that really touch you because you know they're about you, and others that, you know, just some good information, and that's what the Proverbs do, right? They speak to you in all seasons of your life. So we will see you guys next time.